Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to MFA Speaks, one of the special events organized to celebrate Campus Literature Week at the UE. My name is Malcolm Cox, and I'm a lecturer in Literatures in English, and I'm joined by some of the leading lights of the current MFA program. So in no particular order, welcome to Lynette Hazel. So Lynette is the winner of the 2015 UE Faculty of Humanities and Education Award for Creative Writing, Prose and Poetry, and the Kamau Braithwaite Bursary Awardee from 2011. Her short story entitled A Gathering for Butterflies has been published in Ada Magazine's No Speak issue 3, while Jumbi Make It to Walk the Road was longlisted for the BCLF Elizabeth Nunes Prize for Writers in the Caribbean in 2022. Alexandra Stewart is a 7-time finalist of the First Citizens National Poetry Slam, the only 3-time champion and the first in history to win the competition consecutively. As an experienced teaching artist, she's led creative writing workshops for students twice her age and as young as 3 years old. She's just completed a manuscript, a collection of short stories, and looks forward to writing her first novel. Sunil Whittle is a third-year MFA creative writing student at the UE St. Augustine. His short story entitled Rocket was longlisted for the BCLF Elizabeth Nunes Prize for Writers in the Caribbean in 2022. So Sunil, you're very welcome. Sarah Acham, advertising content creator by day, writer and editor by night. Sarah Acham's work coming out of the UE St. Augustine MFA program is the young adult novel, How to Be a Superhero. Shalini Jabbar is an e-commerce professional and an MFA creative writing candidate. Her MFA work is focused on writing fictional representations of modern-day challenges underpinned by generational trauma. She has a BA from the University of the West Indies, specializing in communication studies, and has been working in this field since graduating in 2013. She believes that storytelling is the center of human experience and wants to contribute her perspective to that experience. Laura Ann Phillips. So Laura Ann is a second-year student of the MFA in Creative Writing program. Her reverence for the Caribbean and its people that features heavily in her fiction stems from more than 15 years serving as a missionary in various Caribbean islands. A journalist and a feature writer, she also edits non-fiction books. Vishala Christopher. Vishala Christopher is in the third year of the MFA program at the UE. Her short story entitled Jumbi Like Long Hair was shortlisted for the BCLF Elizabeth Nunes Prize for Writers in the Caribbean in 2022. This was the first time she'd been shortlisted for any major writing prize. Okay, so that's the introductions done. Together, the point of the panel is that we want to kind of explore the journey a writer makes to developing and completing a project in a formal program of study like the MFA. So the MFA Creative Writing Program is home to budding writers of various walks of life. Their time within the MFA has allowed them to develop the tools to hone their craft and to participate with confidence within the creative sector of the Caribbean, and perhaps even to pioneer new forms and genres, to find new stories to tell or new ways of telling them. So as we celebrate our local writers for this year's Campus Literature Week, it's only fair that we acknowledge our very own MFA achievers. There have been legendary greats that have gone before us, and some still alive in our midst and writing strong, but we also look forward to and celebrate the potential of our future that's represented by these emerging writers. So to start off, everybody, I'd love it if I could invite each of you to introduce yourself. So not so much a bio of the kind that we've had, but to tell us something a bit about your current writing projects and your practices. So shall we maybe start with you, Alex?
All right, my name is Alexandra Stewart. Right now, I am focused on some poems, really just putting my ear to the ground of what's been happening locally, regionally, internationally. We're in slam season as we speak, so the National Poetry Slam is coming up again, semifinals, finals. And so getting back into that space to return to the stage as defending champion, I've really been trying to put my finger on the pulse of what's happening.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Alexandra. So Lynette, do you want to talk about what you're up to?
Well, I am working on my manuscript for the MFA program. My focus is on belonging and identity. I am Tobagonian by birth and by, I was brought up in Tobago, spent more than half my life there. So I understand that environment, and I was looking at the contrast between living in Trinidad and Tobago. I think I'm a true Trinbagonian because I've shared all these spaces. And Alex, yeah, you see that keeping your finger on the pulse of things that happen and those things that inform your work. Yeah, that's critical for me right now as well. So.
Okay. Brilliant. Thanks so much. Laura, do you mind going next?
Well, at this time, I am working, good evening, everyone. At this time, I'm working on my manuscript for the MFA, and that focuses on the Caribbean in a future time. It is speculative fiction, and it's a collection of connected short stories that mirror what the Caribbean is like now, the issues that affect us, the environment, poverty and development, and the ways in which our culture informs the way in which we approach life and deal with the challenges that we have. And in looking at this futuristic Caribbean that's set very much on its way to an unknown space, an unknown planet, we look again at how some of those very same tools address the issues that face them there. So again, Caribbean people, my first love, and their development and thriving.
Thank you so much. That sounds really interesting. Shalini, please.
Hi, everybody. So I would have submitted my manuscript in January, not too long ago. It's based off of, it's a collection of short stories, about 8 short stories that are centered around the experiences of people within the East Indian community, and mainly within a Hindu framework. I referenced like Hindu scriptures, and I talked about traditions and practices and kind of interrogated those a little bit to try to see where those may have originated from and how they've affected generations after to come. And since that, I've kind of been just focusing on reading, actually. I haven't started anything new just yet because I felt like during the master's program, I would have read things that contributed to my work for the program. But now I'm getting to kind of be a little freer with my choices in terms of actually reading what I want to read. So that's what I've been up to since I submitted.
Okay, fantastic. That sounds great to be at that space where you're reading freely. Brilliant. Sunil, please.
Hi, I'm also working on my manuscript right now. It's a collection of short stories. I focused on human connection, basically. It's about a fictional village called Aristotle that in my mind is somewhere up Jerningham Avenue. And the main themes that I am exploring is the way that local culture deals with issues of sex and sexuality, domestic violence, and mental health.
Thank you. Great. And Sarah, please.
Hi, I am kind of in the same space as Shalini, that I'm doing a lot of reading. I recently submitted my manuscript. That was a young adult novel about a young boy coming of age, very based within community and empowerment. He's growing up and growing into himself, and I'm finding myself very interested, since I've submitted it, very interested in continuing to explore that. So I have thoughts and ideas mulling around, but yeah, reading and just taking in a lot of content to feed that right now.
That makes sense. Great, Sarah, thank you. And last but definitely not least, Vishala, please.
Hi. I would say that my writing has taken a huge shift as I have started my MFA, because before I never thought that I had the talent to write Caribbean stories, and I mainly stuck with writing, in the standard language. I never used dialect, even though I speak dialect daily. It's what I'm most comfortable with. And I would write horror stories a lot, but after dabbling a little bit in writing with the dialect and writing Caribbean short stories, I realized that that was where I felt more comfortable. And I've kind of solidified myself as a writer that focuses more on Caribbean people and really places that importance of writing stories that I could relate to and that people like me could relate to, because I didn't read a lot of stories like that growing up. So my wish is that there are people out there that can read my stories and relate to it. So I focus a lot on, you know, Indo-Caribbean women experiences, LGBTQ plus experiences, and how they exist within a Caribbean space. And yeah, that I'm by journey, that's where it's at right now. And I'm just riding where it's heading, and I'm gonna see where it goes. So that's it right now.
Fantastic, Vishala, thank you. And really that feeds into something that I wanted to ask. So I'm going to kind of ask it now. Life before the MFA. So I'm interested whether people had a practice, what drew them, excuse me, to the MFA. So what was the attraction? How did you know that this was the course that you wanted to do? And were you writing before? Did you have a practice? There'll be a follow-on question about what might have changed and how the MFA has changed it. But for now, just, you know, before the MFA, what were people up to? So I'll throw that out there to anybody who'd like to answer.
Well, before the MFA, I was directly working as a missionary, so that I did not have a lot of time to write fiction. I would write a lot of nonfiction. I'd write a lot of features for different publications around the Caribbean. So between that and the other services, I had not thought of writing fiction. I didn't have the time to dedicate to it in any event. It was only when I came back to Trinidad that I had to re-enter the world of work, and I had to reconsider what I was going to do, because I had to rethink how to enter journalism, what kind of journalism I wanted to do. So that I found the MFA through the Booker's Lit Festival. And it occurred to me that I never thought of entering a program to develop fiction, because I used to write fiction prior to that, but very much privately for my own self, you know, for my own interest. So it was a very different space to be able to have a space dedicated to sharpening those tools, those raw tools that you had, or I suppose substituting the tools that weren't tools at all and learning to get rid of those.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And I think you were hearing this a lot in your introductions to yourselves, how, you know, writing and life seem quite porous, how lots of you are working with and inspired by communities, even when you're looking at genres like speculative fiction or kind of Aristotle places set in fictional spaces. So that's great. And I think that whole idea of moving into the MFA, and I'm going to come back to you, Laura, and to sort of see what's changed and how your writing has kind of developed. Is there anybody who sort of shares that experience of writing privately for themselves and then moved towards kind of formalizing it? Or indeed, is there anybody who's always kind of had a practice and this is just a step for them to develop or change it? I'm curious about you, Alex, actually, with your sort of poetry slam career. How does that fit in with the MFA? Have you been sort of writing poems from a young age, or is this something that's kind of taken off more recently?
Wow, it's a great question. I've been writing since I was younger. I always knew that writing was something that I would want to do, that I considered it just part of everyday life. I'd get home and fly onto the computer and just type away. I loved and gravitated towards poetry, especially in high school, because I loved that I could finish getting all my thoughts down and have this sort of completed literary experience in like 1 or 2 sessions. And I really enjoyed that. And then getting into slam poetry while I was still in high school. And after I'd graduated, it became just a regular part of my life, performing at places, performing in slam and outside. So I did have a regular writing practice, but poetry had sort of consumed my writing life. And it was interesting to see that happen, because when I first started, my passion was stories, novels. I just wanted to write trilogies upon trilogies, but I struggled with the finishing. I would be halfway through, I would have all my ideas mapped out, and then I would get bored. I'm like, okay, I know how the story is going to end. I don't want to write this anymore. And so part of entering the MFA was really seeking the discipline to get to the end of a story and to do the time and reworking and editing that stories really demand from you in a very greedy way that you get some relief with poetry. So.
Okay, excellent. I've got a question also about performance and poetry. Do you write poems differently? Just on that point, do you have it in your mind where something is definitely written for a live performance, a poem that's to be read out loud but not performed by you? Do you distinguish between those things?
Yes, I see a clear distinction between them. I know that some people view it that whether it's stage or page, it doesn't matter. But for me, in my practice, I've found that I see decisive markers between a poem that I'm writing for a stage performance. I write lines with the knowledge of how I'm going to use my body, how I'm going to use my voice to either create a double entendre or just develop the point even further. I think when I'm writing for the page, I'm very mindful of form and how the poem is going to lie and how someone else is going to read it. Because when I think of page poetry, I don't think about performing it myself. I think about how the person who interacts with this poem is going to lend their voice to the piece. And that kind of guides my writing.
Okay, brilliant, really interesting. So yeah, imagining it being voiced by other speakers and other performers other than yourself. So Neil, I wonder if you can tell us a bit about Aristotle. Did Aristotle exist before the MFA program? Did a project like it exist, or is it something that's come into being through the program? And what was life as a writer for you like before the MFA?
Sure. Aristotle did not exist before the program. I made it up as part of a writing exercise. When I was doing undergrad, I did literature and a concentration in journalism. And that's where I learned about doing, just random writing exercises to keep thoughts flowing and have, I guess, a bank of information that you can go back to inspire writing. Mm-hmm. And during the MFA, that's where I did a writing exercise on my own that led me to Aristotle. It actually started off as I don't want to say a slavery story, but a romance set in slavery time. It was a very short story that went nowhere. And that's where Aristotle was born. I thought about what romance looks like to different people in different times. And the manuscript that I'm writing moves along a very long timeline. Based in Aristotle, however, which is just a fictional part of Trinidad and Tobago, which is supposed to be, good, wholesome people. That's what their thought is, that, they are better than everybody else because they don't have strife and drama. But really what we're talking about is the fact that everybody's life is basically the same in some way, right? So we're exploring what goes on behind the facade. But not much writing was done before the MFA for a while. I graduated from my undergrad in 2011 and came back to Trinidad and really didn't do much writing at all until I took mentoring with the master's program, a program that the government would provide every summer. I did a creative nonfiction program in the summer of 2018, I think it was. And that, in speaking with the mentor about how I might move forward, because I was feeling a little stuck in my life and didn't know where I should try to turn, how I should pivot. We discussed the MFA and I was like, that sounds like a good idea. Especially since, like Alex, I needed a lot of discipline to figure out how to chart my way through a story. And as a writer, I am not good at mapping at all. I just kind of write and the story goes where it goes.
Right.
You know, and then maybe I will come back and move it around for flow and that sort of thing.
Right.
I really wanted to learn how to, you know, sharpen the skills to make the writing a more concise, I guess, experience.
Right. Great. And has your current project involved sort of research? So setting it against the backdrop of slavery, a kind of sensitive period, sometimes difficult to recover precisely some of those experiences. Are you aiming for authenticity? I know you talked about your writing being relevant to contemporary audiences. And I don't know, I'm thinking of a novel like The Sweetness of Water. And I don't know if you've kind of read it. It's an abolition era novel that also involves a kind of romance story that mostly gets it right. But I think there are still kind of moments where you wonder about the balance between a contemporary readership and then the kind of historical authenticity.
Well, just to clarify, Aristotle started as a writing exercise that involved a slavery era romance story. It did not stay there. It's not set in any particular time. What indicates, I guess, the period that we're in is the absence of things. So I don't actually tell the audience that we're in any specific time. But there is no mention of a cell phone, a computer, a car, anything like that.
Right.
And those are the indicators for the timeline. But it's a pretty long timeline, just from before the time of cell phones.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So Lynn, I want to kind of move on and think a little bit about, you know, how the MFA program has helped you with your writing. What's the impact? How has it helped you understand the work that you're engaged in? How has it improved your skill in bringing your project to light? I mean, you spoke earlier about your sort of Trinbogian identity and the fact that community is important to you and that you've got, like Alex, your pulse on the finger of things. But how has that all kind of come together? What are some of the things that the MFA has allowed you to do that perhaps you might not have done before? And the same question following up to you, Sarah, if that's okay. You're lucky you get a bit of time to think about it.
Well, that is a most excellent question. Mm-hmm. I want to say that coming out of undergrad, undergrad just allowed me to realize that I had a voice, that I had something to say. But the MFA program is where I'm actually finding the confidence to say it. Much of my work hinges on the separations that the literary separations between Trinidad and Tobago, because we did one course last semester where we had to start doing real research, and that kind of form the foundation of where you're going with your writing. And literally, there's no presence of Tobago in the literature of Trinidad and Tobago. So I started from there, because there is that othering, that sense of othering, that sense of you're separate and apart and only referred to conveniently, and to some extent. And as a people, as wanting to be, you know, we advertise ourselves as one people. I really felt as though I could engage with that gap. And the MFA, you know, yeah, everybody says discipline, 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 but it's a real thing. Like having to produce the work, having to sit yourself down every single day and come to it, and not waiting on arbitrary inspiration or, you know, whatever like that. It really forces you to think about what you're going to do your research, read widely, and there's a maturity of vision that the MFA program is actually teaching me. And I I mean, as of now, I can't calculate how valuable that is, as well as bringing me into a community of writers, which I think is also plays a huge part in your development. So yes, the cohort may be small, but there's a wider purpose that it serves for the writer, because writing is such an individual thing. Yeah. That it is great to be a part of like-minded, well, to share space with like-minded persons. We all feel as though that's our calling. I think that for me is the most impactful reason to be in the MFA program.
Right. Yeah, really great to hear that. And I think that was a question I was going to ask, is how valuable and how important as a resource to each other are you as members of the same writing community? So we might come back to that, because I think there are a few things more I want to ask about that. But Sarah, your chance to talk about, you know, how you've navigated the MFA and how it's helped you in any way with your own writing practice.
The MFA has helped me a lot. I mean, I was not writing, or at least not fiction before I started. I had done some writing as a child and was always interested in it as I grew up. I guess just, you know, life happens, exams happen, and you have to stop doing the fun thing to do what's needed. And it just kind of fell off for me. But every time I saw, when I had done my bachelor's, every time I saw an English course or something to do with writing, I was like, I would like to do that. But never occurred to me that I actually could do it. Mm-hmm. So when I came back home and I was looking to do my master's, I thought, well, I was working at UWI at the time. And so I said, well, convenient. And I looked through the course booklet, not really knowing exactly what I was going to do. I saw the creative writing degree and I thought, okay, well, there we go. That's it. And it's not simply a course, it's an entire degree. So I joined it because I wanted that. We keep talking about discipline to sit and write, to produce something. Mm-hmm. And that's what it has helped me to do. It has forced me to do. It was a struggle, but I was able to find that story that really wanted to come out, or at least one of them. Yeah. The tools, the repetition, and just the community, like Lynette said, us together when we were able to be together in our WhatsApp group. I mean, that community really helped me to keep at it, and helps me to continue to keep at it, because we still, you know, chat. Mm-hmm. I think it's invaluable.
Yeah, great. And do you think, as well as better writers, better readers, because presumably you're reading each other's work, and how is that experience of having to read work of somebody, seeing a project go from start to a kind of, you know, developed stage to completion, perhaps? Do you have people whose reading you particularly value, who you feel like this is work, this is a good kind of readerly relationship, or does that shift? Would anyone like to speak to that, the idea of reading each other's work and what role that plays in your development as a writer and indeed as a reader?
Well, in our classes, there was the experience of reading each other's work every week, so that you were listening to other people develop what would become their manuscript, because you realized that although at the beginning you were expected to think about what your project would be, in many ways, certainly for me, it was not very clear until about halfway through the course or a little later on where my focus would lie. I suppose it was simply about recognizing that my focus had always lain there, and I had not yet articulated it to myself. So it was interesting to see other people going through that process as well, to look at the different styles of expression that people had, based on their own experience, based on what their longings were and their passions were. And in a very real way, that allowed me to work at developing my own passion as well, and to see the ways in which the program program develops people who are so different and who are interested in so many different things, but it all redounds to the same in the end. These are people who are very interested in empowering Caribbean people, in furthering Caribbean literature, in finding the voices of those around them and finding ways of making those voices heard. So it's something that becomes very, very tangible almost when you experience others' work in your little class, but eventually I would like to think in the wider program.
Brilliant, thank you. And I mean, it's really interesting, that point about the fact that you're kind of all engaged in a similar calling and with similar interests, but there's a great variety. We've already heard the kind of variety of genres that we've got. And I'm wondering, and I'm really thinking a little bit about you, Shalini, here, how do you get the balance between writing as you do about Indo-Trinidadian women's experiences, but for a wider, presumably also a wider Caribbean global readership? How does that sort of work? And it's a similar dynamic, you know, within the community of readers that you've got on the program, and then engaging that beyond.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it is something that came up in when we would have these classes and we would read out loud, and the feedback that I would get would be, you know, some questions as to, okay, what does this word actually mean, or what are you referring to? And in my mind, it's like, I know what I mean, but everybody else doesn't know what I mean. So I have to go back now and I have to rethink it. And I have to kind of think of it as take myself out of the shoes of the character or the person that's actually writing the story and think about it as somebody that has no idea what I'm talking about, just bare bones of the human experience, and describe it like that. And that is something that I actually found I got better and better at as my stories went along in my manuscript. Like, I could have actually seen the difference from start to finish, because in the beginning it would be me explaining myself a lot, and I would have to learn how to kind of cut that down and be more concise and not say so much. So it was definitely, that was actually something that the MFA actually taught me how to do, was to say a lot without saying a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. That sounds really great and interesting. You know, a lot of you have mentioned so far that discipline and the kind of discipline to write a structure, a community, are really important. And we hear lots of stories, and I'm always intrigued and fascinated by writers' processes and the things that help them to write. You know, so Yeats was supposed to have intoned his poems in a sort of trance-like state. Some writers use dictaphones and kind of have a read out or dictate. Some people write in kind of intense flurry, some take a long time, some spend more time on editing. So I wonder, maybe thinking, Alex, it would be quite interesting to hear from you on this as a performance poet, and also then Vishala, maybe, what are some of your rituals, habits, disciplines that allow you to continue writing?
When it comes to writing, I think of it like ketchup apps. At least for me, that's been my experience. I will be minding my business, washing dishes, brushing my teeth, and the story idea will come, and I'll be like, I need to write this down before I forget. So I get the same thing for poems. I think a lot of my writing happens in my head. So I might read an article or hear a story or experience something that sticks with me in an uncomfortable way, and then unbeknownst to myself, I'm ruminating on it, and then suddenly there's just this overflow, this flood of words that needs to be written down immediately. In terms of my own rituals when it comes to writing, I think there's only one thing that I do very consistently, and that is when I have the world for a story built. I always make a playlist for it. I think music is very tied to my writing. So when I get into that zone where I'm seeing characters' faces, I can see the place where they are and I can feel their story unfolding. The next thing I want to do is create their soundtrack and write everything else to the tune of that.
All right, that's amazing. And I think maybe I've not quite heard that account of a writing process before. Making a playlist, like it, love it. Vishala, what about you? Any sort of routines, habits, practices things that you kind of draw on that become familiar and helping you kind of move your writing along?
I don't really have any habits. I don't think so, but similarly to Alex, I'm always creating stories in my head. I'm constantly building worlds and, you know, creating characters, and it's always happening. But I do have a very weird, I do have a weird writing habit. When I actually sit down to write, I could never consistently write a story like in a set timeline. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, absolutely.
I don't go from start, middle, end.
Mm-hmm.
I start at the end. I start in the middle. Sometimes I get bored in the middle. I go to the beginning. Then I get bored there. I go back to the end. So a lot of my writing are like all over the place. And sometimes it frustrates me because I don't get work completely finished in time to send to Dr. Amai for review. And I'm sure she's very annoyed by that, but I'm so sorry, Dr. Amai. But sometimes that's just how the story happens. And I think that is how it needs to happen. I tend to let it flow how it needs to. I let it do its thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when I feel like I'm comfortable enough to say, okay, we are at the end, this is what it needs to say, this is, you know, the point that it needs to bring across to its readers, then I sit down and I go through the whole thing and see how I can connect everything so that it's cohesive enough and makes sense to the readers. Because when I'm writing like that, I know what's happening at every point. So I'm able to keep up with everything, even though it's all over the place. But if it doesn't connect, then how do I expect my reader to know what's in here? I need to make sure that what's in here connects to the page.
Yeah.
So I really tend to sit down and put a lot of effort into the editing process, even though I hate it so much. It's my least favorite part of writing, but that's just how it is.
Yeah, I hear you. I think a lot of that resonates, the difficulty with editing. I'm sure some people are more disciplined, better editors of their own work than others. But I'm jealous of both of you in the sense that your habit is a creative one, that you're constantly creating worlds or kind of magpieing, picking things that will inspire the next story. And I think that's different. It's not something that everybody experiences. For some people, it's more like, you know, turning on taps into rusty pipes and trying to get trying to that painful process of a story that's been germinating for ages to come out onto the page. Anybody else that who has a kind of an interesting process, practice, habit, routine, or discipline, or something that they related to from what Charla and Alex told us?
Yeah. Can I just share?
Yeah, please do.
That my trusty pen. I must have these pens to write with. If I don't have these pens, a pencil would do, but
it's the pen.
Yeah, it's the pen. It must be the click pen. It just must. Sorry.
Whatever helps you, whether it's that kind of familiar click, whether it's the feel of the pen, that makes sense as well. I think Shalini, you were going to say something.
Yeah,
as well.
I don't know how interesting this is, but usually what I do is I write a first draft and then I completely forget about it for like months, actual months, and then come back to it and read it as if it's brand new. And then I read it and then I completely write it over. Like I don't even edit it. I just write it over. And I found that actually really works for me, because sometimes the second draft that I've written over would look completely different.
Yeah, no, I think I hear you, and that makes a lot of sense. Coming back to it fresh, as though you were a reader rather than the writer, would change things on how you edit it. Fabulous. I think a sort of maybe a slightly related question. I'm very interested in influences. We said at the start of this this kind of webinar that we've got a great many living writers and a great many writers from the past in the Caribbean that pack a huge punch kind of in terms of the literary scene. And I want to hear a little bit about who people are influenced by. I don't think it's obligatory to have any specific influences, but I think quite often people do. So who is, if you want to find a particular cadence or tone, or you're writing in a particular way, are there any writers that you turn to? Are there any writers that you're looking at or aspiring, inspired by as you write, rather? So anybody, Sunil, does this sort of resonate with you? Do you have particular writers that you think, this is where I'm going, these are the voices that are important to me?
Actually, at this time, I do not. I was not acquainted at all, basically, with Caribbean writers. I had no intention of living in Trinidad or writing for a Caribbean audience. I went to school in America, and that is the kind of writing that I initially pursued.
Mm-hmm.
Only when starting the MFA, did I find that I had a particular talent for moving through Trinidad English Creole and using it to be very impactful in what I'm saying. So I'm now becoming acquainted with more Caribbean writers. Really was not aware that there were so many people that I could draw inspiration from. What I'm currently reading, of course, the new Barbara Jenkins, The Stranger Amongst Myself, Ayana Lloyd Bambo, who just released her new novel. I actually knew her since we were children, so I was very excited to read what she's put out. I'm on a waiting list for the new Andre Bagu, and I'm hoping that it will help me take a different perspective on the way that I write, language usage and that sort of thing.
Yeah, okay, great. Same question to you, Sarah. Are there people out there, dead or alive, who inspire your kind of work?
No, I don't think so. I did not intend for my piece to come out the way that it did. I wasn't intending to write YA fiction, but it just happened. I never was a reader of young adult, maybe when I was quite a bit younger, but after that I graduated onto adult novels, adult fiction pretty young. So no, I wouldn't say that there's any writer that influenced the work that I've produced, but there are writers whose writing I really love and would have inspired me to want to write at all. No local writers, actually Earl Lovelace, his book, it starts off, I Am King Kala, just another movie, that just the beginning of that, actually that really, like I kind of had that in my head as I wrote the beginning of my novel, to be honest. So I think I would definitely call on him. But I grew up reading horror, Stephen King, the R.L. Steins. Stephen King in particular, I've loved the authenticity in his writing, in his narration. And so that I take lesson from. His tone is not mine, but I take lesson from that. I love the poetry in some writing. Neil Gaiman would be one of them, and Rice, very poetic.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's
amazing. That's a pretty diverse repertoire of kind of voices that at various points. I feel like all writers, whether consciously or unconsciously, have been readers at some point and are haunted by particular voices, cadences, lines. So it's interesting here. Anybody like to speak to that question of influence before we move on? But we also have this kind of idea here of what might characterize your generation of emergent writers. So people emerging onto the scene, and how does that look different, if it does, from, say, current contemporary established writers? I don't know whether this is actually a thing or if it's a thing that you've been able to identify. The two people who have their fingers on pulses may be able to say something about this. Do you think that your generation of writers has something that characterizes their work that sets it apart from the established voices of Caribbean or indeed global literatures? Alex, I'd love it if you...
Am I taking that one first? Okay. I think that question, I've been looking for the answer to that question. I'm certain that there is one that I could point it out right now. I'm not certain of that. I will say that for every generation, one of the things that writers and artists in general do is sort of push the boundaries of taboo topics, of what's okay to discuss, of what's okay to put on paper. I think definitely my generation pushes that even further in terms of wanting to discuss even the things that people shoo and hush about, and to see it on the page, I think is really beneficial. I think the new swarm of Caribbean writers that are emerging right now means that there's going to be a significant amount of representation for young Caribbean people, especially in different genres. And that's what I'm most excited about, to see Trinidadian and Tobagonian and, just people from all over the Caribbean represented in fantasy, represented in all different genres and science fiction, and seeing how that unfolds in Caribbean context is going to be very, very exciting. And I think in a few years, I'll be able to give you a very decisive answer on what sets us apart. But I think for sure right now, we are in good hands.
Yeah, no, you're right. It does require hindsight, retrospect to answer that question properly. But thanks for having a go and giving a really interesting answer to that. So you think it might be sort of experiment in genre and also a kind of a new boldness to sort of speak things that have been previously unspoken or not vocalized. That's really fascinating. Does anyone else have any sort of response to Alex or a different thought on that question? Okay, so we'll leave it as hindsight and retrospect. We'll kind of provide clarity. But I think sort of, another sort of slightly more abstract question away from your practice, but why do we think that writing, and by extension reading, fiction, non-fiction, poetry, all of the kind of new genres that we're talking about, we haven't really talked about kind of theatre, but performance poetry sort of Pat covers it. Why are those things important in our society now? And I'm really thinking about, at the risk of sounding like a sort of Luddite or a dinosaur of some kind, but in an age of technology, where we're kind of used to reading 140 characters in a tweet or much smaller posts, does writing, and maybe the people who are writing novels here particularly might want to answer this, or short stories, does that space, does the novel kind of have a future? And is it important that we can read with the attention that a novel requires, as opposed to a tweet or a Facebook post?
Not so long ago, I read an article about a Norwegian library that is in the process of gathering 100 books that most people will never read. So in their program, they've planted these trees, these seedlings, so that by the time the trees mature 100 years from now, the stories that would have been accumulated over those 100 years would be published on paper from those trees. So some of the people who are intended to contribute work to that program have not even been born yet. And they're very aware that some of the people who have contributed books now certainly will not be alive when those books are printed. And so I think this exercise in longevity is also very important for our region, important for our world, yes, but certainly important for our region, so that we cannot believe that the world will always exist on work that is the length of a tweet, that there will be those invested in reviewing, looking back, and those here and now who are also invested in taking the time to explore the sweetness of our language, the beauty of our challenges, the things that make us who we are, the different shards of trauma that can come together and continue to make us whole people, even as we put together our shards of trauma. So I do not fear for the length and the depth of what we have to see. You know, as I went around to different places, I was so taken by how much we have in common. In particular, the beauty of the language of Creole and the different varieties of Creole, the ways that Creole changes from island to island. And in spite of that, or perhaps in like fashion, there are so many things that make us, that are so different about us, yes. But there is far more sameness than there is difference, at the risk of sounding kind of banal. No, but more than anything, I was so aware of the fact that we really are one people in many, many ways. And so it is worth investing the time, the language, the experiments we are worth investing in at this time. And perhaps it is necessary to start thinking that long term for our region.
Okay. Yeah, I love being on a panel with writers. That's beautifully put. Explore the sweetness of our language, think about the nuances in every sort of shard of trauma. So in some ways for you, you think that, you know, writing fiction novels, longer projects have a sort of role to play in terms of shared experiences across the Caribbean, and the idea that we can recognize similarities in a region, and not only see differences. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at the importance of it. Thank you. Any sort of other thoughts on that idea of kind of, you know, what it takes to write fiction, but also what it takes to read fiction, and how perhaps digital technology and the pace of life in general might affect or change that kind of readerly capacity?
Something that I thought of while Laura Ann was answering and giving her perspective was that we actually have so many more tools to talk about our own writing now, and create like a platform for ourselves and draw people in towards what we're working on, and kind of give them bite-sized pieces of it and help people learn who we are and the stories that we're telling. And I think that that's really important for us to use that evolution to support the stories that we're writing. So in terms of getting people to read our work, you know, I think we can really put ourselves out there in a different way and connect to other people that may have similar perspectives, and even learn a lot from others, and have even a greater sense of community within that digital space.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. I like that. So actually, digital technologies are an opportunity for connection, for dissemination, for drawing in audiences, and I think I absolutely is a positive way of looking at it. And it really leads me to another sort of question here. We know that the world of publishing, the world of writing competitions, is an extremely competitive one. And I know from going through some of your bios that some of you have already had experience of that, success with that, but presumably it's not sort of every single time that you hit the mark in terms of your work being accepted for a competition or winning a competition or for publication. So really this is thinking about people who are watching this webinar and thinking about writing and wondering about readerships and wondering about that world of competition, publishing, etc. So how do you keep going when you don't succeed at first? And what insights have you gathered, perhaps particularly during the MFA, about publishing and readerships and competitions? How important are they to what you're doing? So maybe Sarah, would you like to kind of reflect on that and start us off?
I've not submitted to very many competitions. I actually just won, well, we have such talent here that I wasn't, your first time, you're not really expecting anything, so it was fine. Right now though, I am looking for a publisher for my novel, and that's where I'm learning about it right now. I have very little experience. I have very few rejections to have had to deal with as yet. So
may it stay that way. Few rejections to deal with is excellent. Anybody else, advice about, competitions, publishing, anything like that, experiences of it, particularly maybe when it doesn't work out the way that you want it to work out?
I'm thinking that your original purpose, your original writing purpose plays a great part of how you continue along the road. Yes, everyone would like recognition and all that good stuff, but primarily the impulse to writing is an individual one, very interior, and hopefully we all grow thick skins, because we're obviously not going to, well, sorry, not obviously, but we're not going to win at everything that we put our hands to. Yeah, some measure of success, it boosts your confidence, yes, but I think we all need to grow thick skins, because there's so, Sarah just said it, there's so much talent out here, and we're all writing towards the same purpose. And if you're not bearing that in mind, then it could, put a serious dent into your confidence and your willingness to continue along the road. But at least for me, first and foremost, I write because there's an internal impulse to, and then I'm going to develop a very thick skin and learn that not every piece of writing will be the one at that time.
Got it. Yeah, I like that. It's a very kind of, philosophical attitude to take, that it's about resilience and it's about understanding timing, and it's also an awareness of the many writers and voices out there. That's brilliant. Laura, you were going to say.
I was going to piggyback on Sarah, because I too have only submitted to one competition, at which I was not successful. But I wanted to say that I found the MFA useful in that, although they do advertise many competitions that are around and encourage you to submit, they do the homework of preparing you for what lies outside. Lynette referred to the resilience, thick skin that is necessary. And I suppose the one thing I want to take away from the MFA, well, there are many, but in this instance, you recognize that you're very much competing against yourself. You are your greatest competition, precisely because there are so many who are great in so many respects, but there is only one you. There's nothing new under the sun, but no one else will ever express it as you would, as the individual writer would. So I think one of the things that we had in common when I listened to other people share, not on necessarily on this platform, but confidence was something that afflicted just about every person in class. Simply wondering, am I good enough? Is it that, that my writing is terrible, or is it that I just simply didn't make it this time? And there's always that voice in the back of your head that niggles, am I really good enough? Am I? And again, the program helps you approach that maturity to your writing, where you pay attention to what you're doing, and to, of course, be aware that that the seasons change for what is popular, for what is desirable, for the mood that the editor might be in that day, whatever that might be. So in that way, it helps to not crush you. They ensure that you not only have the tools and have the space within which to practice it, the community within which to perfect it, but to know that what you offer to the world is something that it could be somebody's favorite book, that your image is somebody's favorite image, something that takes them to that place that is precious to them. And so in that way, it's not as vulgar as, I won a competition, I entered a competition because I'm going to win. The win really is the work and the quality of the work that you produce.
Okay, brilliant.
Not, of course, certainly not, not dumbing down what anyone else has done, not downplaying anybody's achievement, but simply talking about the journey that each writer must make.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's great. Lynette, you were...
Sorry, if I could really just, that was so brilliantly put, Laura. And if I could just say that if even your one piece of writing causes a mindset shift for one person, I think that too is a win. It may not, it may not be the international acclaim, but you've affected one life. That one life has an impact in your culture, in your community, and I value that.
Yeah. No, excellent. I love that advice, that you're setting goals for yourself, that you're making a difference to readers yet unknown, that you kind of have a community, and that it isn't that the win is actually the journey, the project, making yourself happy with your writing. I think that's really important. I think there's also the perspective of history. There are many writers who did exactly that, circulated in small communities, didn't sort of achieve claim, were pre the era of competitions, and who've been kind of recognized afterwards, who continue to make an impact. So I can see why this is such a nice community, and a kind of supportive one and a wise one. So that's brilliant. A slightly risky question, so without rocking too many boats, I think, just looking at who we've got on the screen, thinking about writers that I've seen recently, thinking about things that I've read recently, there's an argument to be made, perhaps, that writing in both kind of sort of fiction and poetry, at least, is an art that is, if not dominated by, really well represented by women. So Sunil, I'll be interested to hear what you think as well. And I don't really know what the rest of the cohort looks like. It could be a coincidence. But do we think that's true? Can we account for it? Are there reasons? Have you thought about this? Is there a kind of gendered dynamic to those who are our kind of creative producers in terms of fiction and non-fiction? And I know that there's lots of exceptions to that. But what do we think? Or do you think I'm talking rubbish, that there's no gender dynamic? I'm also very happy to hear that. Anyone got any thoughts? Alex? And then Laura, go on.
Well, I think I have an interesting perspective coming from spoken word poetry, because when I entered, it was really dominated by the men in this space. And that was the voice that owned the stage, and all first, second, and third place for quite many years. And I mean, you'd see pockets of moments in between. I think there was one year in particular where history was made, where women won first, second, and third. That year, it was really phenomenal to see. But I think when it comes to poetry, the requirement almost to delve into emotion and share innermost thoughts could be taboo in certain male spaces. There's a lot of negative association with that, especially in a Caribbean context, in terms of even acknowledging that men have feelings, that men can cry, that men can be emotionally overwhelmed. And I think the arts are an opportunity to express that. So there are a lot of male writers, but they may not always share publicly. And especially in terms of spoken word, I think that's one of the things that I really admire, that it is an opportunity where men can take the stage and talk about things that emotionally impact them, that are on their minds, that worry them, that concern them, and seeing the different forms and different styles that come out because of that. But my greatest desire is that everybody gets their own writing practice, that everybody finds their own way to share their thoughts. And it doesn't mean that it will be their career or the thing that they follow passionately day to day, but that they have that space that they hold where they could write the things that that overwhelm them, that they could journal or just note, or know that their voice is safely somewhere on paper, whether they share it with anyone publicly or otherwise.
Okay, so yeah, that's really interesting about how we connect, and if those connections are sometimes gendered with our own feelings, and how we share those with the community. And so a large part of that, therefore, is you seem to be saying a kind of therapeutic thing, that it's good to be in touch with how you feel. It's good to kind of give those feelings space and air by committing them to writing, whether you share them or not. Anybody else got any thoughts about kind of women in writing, gender dynamics in terms of fictional poetry audiences? We definitely know that women consume more novels than men. That's definitely a recorded trend, but it doesn't always mean that more novels are written by women. I don't know. I don't have facts, so this is highly risky, speculative area. Anyone had any thoughts on this? Laura, were you about to unmute before Alex started?
Yes, but again, like you, I have no facts in that. I was going to say that I can say that the writers that were an influence for me were mainly male writers. So Earl Lovelace and Naipaul and so
yeah.
C.L.R. James, and very few women. You know, Merle Hodge and White Sargasso. See, her name will come back to me. But I'm saying that at one time the group of Caribbean writers that were better known in my time would have been male writers.
Yeah.
And it was not that the females were not known. You had to kind of go find them.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that at this time, we do have a problem with our Caribbean men. We see it all the time in our educational circles, trying to find our boys, trying to hold on to our young men. So I would like to think that in times to come, that the dynamic will change again, that we can share an equal space, that it will not be a whole lot of men, then a whole lot of women, and looking at that gender dynamic. Hopefully it will be something that's a little more equal, where we'll both be able to share at different times. There's so much, I think, that our people need to be able to see and need to be able to have the permission to say it, so that as the world changes and as our region changes, there are so many ways in which we too need to be able to give ourselves permission to rework things and to find how our own ways of dealing with things, how our own traditions, our wisdom, our collective and individual wisdom, to see how that can chart a course for our young men and our young women for the future.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. And I think echoing Alex's sentiment there, that everybody should have a space and access to it, and that these things shift. They're kind of contingent on historical moments. So you said that many of the sort of influences, the writers that you looked at were male, and that's kind of shaped your career. We're in a different moment now, but the future might look different as well. So thank you. I think that we're kind of getting towards the end of our time. I have a question that I would, by way of conclusion, like everybody to answer. And I really think that, again, we're thinking about any writers out there who are either contemplating writing, having trouble getting started, hiding their talents in a bushel, to any literary shrinking violets who are curious or interested, but yet to screw their courage to the sticking place and sign up for the MFA. This is your chance to kind of speak to them. So if you're going to say one thing, let's say, everybody, in terms of why this MFA has been helpful and useful, and why you recommend it to particularly people listening to this who are interested or curious about the MFA and what it is and what it does, please say it now. So maybe I'm going to just start from the bottom of the screen and go anti-clockwise. So Sunil, that's you to kick us off, please.
Sure. I think that more than anything, the MFA gives perspective. At least for me, it did. When you're doing writing exercises on your own with no one to read them but yourself, you could kind of feel alone. You feel alone. You don't know where you land in terms of your skill level, your talent, and also you don't know what's available to you in terms of the way that you might shape your story, or the language that you use, or the content that is available to you. So I think that more than anything, that's what the MFA gave to me, perspective.
Okay, perspective, brilliant. Sarah, please.
For me, I would say confidence. The confidence not just in my own writing, but to actually sit and write, because that, for me at least, takes some strength to actually put words on paper, words that come from me, out of me. So the MFA definitely gave me that. And sorry.
Go on.
And I was just going to say, in the discipline to actually do it.
Thank you very much. So confidence and the discipline to kind of get on with the writing. Excellent. Lynette, please.
I would definitely say support. The MFA program is designed as such that you come in, I don't want to say mouse-like, but you come in with that level of voice, and you find the tools, and your craft expands, you expand, and you're definitely able to reimagine, re-engage, and revision things that would be interesting not just to yourself, but to other people out there. And we should never lose sight of the fact that as each as individuals, we see the world uniquely, and there's a story that only each of us, there's a story that I can tell in my way. There's a story that Alex is going to tell in her way. There's a story Sunil is going to tell in his way. We each have that one particular approach that we're going to bring. And I think the MFA forces us to listen to ourselves and really hone that, who we are, you know.
Brilliant. I like that. So
and own it fully.
Support to find yourself, to find your voice, to take ownership of that. Fantastic. Laura, please.
I'd like to really advertise the MFA as a very respectful program for midlifers. I entered this course very much as this is very much a round 2 of my life, and it came after a very long gap of let's just say life happens, and even within the MFA since starting, you know, there have been several other things that have happened in my own life, you know, aging family members, myself, you know, continuing to age, and the ways in which I love the way that the administration and the faculty and the lecturers were so respectful of that and aware that that your approach to life is certainly very different, you know, at particular times. So that on the one hand, building your confidence in this very new time, and at the same time recognizing that your pace will not always be the same, that sometimes you'll have to defer things for a semester, and helping you to know that all is not lost at that time, and also working with you. So for someone who is re-entering academia or entering academia for the first time, the way the program itself is set up, it's set up in such a way that it's possible to be as fluid as necessary, while at the same time enforcing the discipline necessary to get the work done, to get to the finish line where this degree is concerned. So I really appreciated that, the fact that both the physical way that the program was set up and those administering it were very, very helpful in that sense.
Okay, brilliant. So, you know, the flexibility to accommodate different stages of life, different people, different personalities, different circumstances, while still remaining, you know, sort of solid and giving you that foundation you need. Nicely said. Thank you. Shalini, any thoughts on this for MFA contemplators?
I would say that if to someone that's considering entering this program, if nothing else, do this to get to know more about yourself, because I've learned so much about myself and the way that I think, and I've had to question so many things about the way that I think throughout this entire program, and it's really given me a lot of really good perspective. You're gonna meet so many people with different perspectives. The sense of community that opens up is so vast, and it's really gonna open your mind to the world out there for Caribbean writers. And it's something that I wasn't aware of before I got into the program, and now I can't look away from that. It's part of me, and I am part of it, and I really value that. And just to piggyback off of what Lynette said, you have a unique story to tell. Even if you think the story has been told already, people haven't heard the story from your perspective. And in that way, it's a unique story. So I think that it's worth doing. It's worth just how you're going to feel after knowing what you know about you.
Okay, brilliant. So I like that. The MFA is a space for self-knowledge and self-discovery and discovery of others. Vishala, words of wisdom for MFA would-beers or contemplators?
I think the most important thing that the MFA has taught me is how important your voice is and to be bold with your voice. I think we all, yes, we do have a duty as writers to put our work out there. But like Lynette and Shalini said, our stories are unique. And I think, you know, we should all take that opportunity to really grasp, you know, our talent and develop it as much as possible. And another thing that I really love about the MFA is the sense of community. As you can see here tonight, we are writers of different ages, different backgrounds, and different year groups. And some of us, you know, didn't have any classes together, yet we could feel that sense of belonging and that sense of comfort, just knowing that there are people here that you can turn to for advice, that you can turn to just rant about things, because let's face it, writing is difficult. It's different for everyone. Our journeys are different, yes, but one thing that we can relate to is the struggles of being a writer. So you don't have to face it alone. We have a bunch of people here. They are all lovely. They are ready to welcome you with open arms. So if you've been contemplating it, really, you really should bite the bullet and, you know, face it head on and know how important your voice is and that it should be heard. So yeah, come through.
Thank you, Vishala. Lovely words and hard to resist. So brilliant, boldness, community, belonging. Alex, you've got the honor of having the last word on this question, which is the last question of the panel.
Well, I would say to anybody who is considering joining the MFA, that the MFA is going to make you a more conscious writer. You are going to become keenly aware of your own process. So sign up. Don't let the fear of critique keep you back. If you come, you'll be fine-tuned by feedback. If you come, you'll be challenged. You'll be comforted by a community of the people who are chasing that same dream that is keeping you awake right now. So join us.
Thank you very much. Couldn't have put it better myself. So I think that brings us to the end of the panel. Thank you all for spending time with me this evening, for hearing about your practices, your projects, and about your community. It's really lovely. I feel like, and maybe inspired particularly by Laura, to join the MFA now myself. Such a nice community. Sounds like you have fun. I know that writing is difficult. So thank you very much. And thank you to everybody listening. I hope you have a really good campus lit week. So thanks everybody. Thanks very much for the time, and see you all soon. And look forward to seeing some of these projects when they're completed and out there in the world. Take care.